I'm a server at a Midwestern diner. A few weeks ago, a customer appeared at one of the booths. I say appeared because I hadn't seen her come in, and usually I am very attentive to the sound of the doorbell. It was a pretty bustling evening, though. I approached to take her order. She sat with her back to me, her curly hair pinned up in a style that reminded me of old movies. Her age was hard to determine from behind, but she looked to be in her 60s, I guess. She was sitting perfectly still, statuesque. When I came around to the front of the booth, I gasped and dropped my pen. The woman was not breathing. Lips slightly parted, skin withered and shrunken, no movement, not the faintest motion of her chest. But it was the eyes that were the giveaway she was dead, unblinking and unseeing and a little too deeply shrunken in their sockets. Oh God! I took a step back. And then the woman's head turned and she said in a raspy voice, "Just a coffee." And her eyes blinked. Not dead at all. "Of course, sure. Any milk or sugar?" "Black." I scurried to get her coffee. When I looked back, she was again motionless. When it came time for the check, she put down a $50 bill. I started to tell her I didn't have change since all she'd ordered was a coffee, but she said, "It's all right, dear. It will cover the meal for that nice family over there." Her head inclined, ever so slightly, to a family in the corner booth having dinner. The family in the corner were regulars, came here every Sunday with the kids. The parents were divorced, the kids lived with their dad, and their mom always picked them up on weekends. This diner was on the route between the parents' houses, and they'd meet up here to discuss the plans for the next week. They always left the tip, and the kids drew pictures for me. "Really?" I said to the old woman. "That's very nice of you." Without another word, the old woman stood up and left. The family were very pleasantly surprised when I approached and informed them that their meal had been paid for. They asked by who, and I told them the old woman from the other booth. One of the kids looked over where I'd indicated and said, "I didn't see any woman sitting there." Weird. The next time the old woman appeared was several weeks later. It was after midnight. Again, I heard no bell ring above the door. I was wiping down the counters, and when I looked up, there she was, sitting at the same booth, like a statue, silent. I came over to take her order. I wondered if I should ask her about the family. I hadn't seen them in the weeks since she'd paid for their meal. It was strange. They'd been coming every Sunday, and then after she'd paid their meal, they stopped. As I neared the booth, suddenly the woman inhaled. It struck me that until then, she'd been so still, I hadn't been sure if she'd been breathing at all. She turned to me and said, "Coffee, please, black." "Sure." Since she wasn't exactly chatty, I just went and got her coffee, trying to work up the nerve to strike up a casual conversation and ask her about the family. Before I could, the doorbell rang and Carlos came in. Carlos was a friend of my boss's who liked to drop in once in a while. He ordered a burger, and we began chatting about how things were with his girlfriend and with his girlfriend's boyfriend. I can never keep track of who's in his astonishingly wide relationship circle. Apparently, he'd just adopted a dog. He showed me pictures while he ate. Carlos, not to be mean, but that might be the world's fuggliest dog, I told him. He laughed. "Nobody wanted her, that's why I took her." "That's sweet of you, but that thing looks like it has rabies. Scabies." "What?" "I'm kidding. She's got mange, though." He started to tell me about how he'd rescued her when I heard a throat clear and remembered the woman at the booth. Shoot, I'd forgotten her order. I hurried to get her coffee, and as I set it down, asked if she wanted anything else, and she put a 20 down and said it was for that nice young man's burger. She didn't even drink the coffee I gave her. She got up and left, ignoring me when I started to ask, "Are you sure? Why do you keep paying for—" "Hey," called Carlos, "who are you talking to?" "The woman—" I turned back, but she was already gone.
What woman? It's just you and me. You okay? Are you high or something? I looked at the money in my hand. It was real enough. "Burgers on the house," I told him. "For real? Thanks." He scarfed the last bite, hopped up and told me he was late. No idea what sort of date he was off to at 1 a.m., but that's Carlos. And then he was breezing out the door. The next day, I heard he'd been shot. My boss told me. We were chatting about the boss's dog, and I mentioned Carlos's mangy rescue dog, and he suddenly got serious and informed me that last night, Carlos had been jumped on his way to a bar. He tried to fight off the muggers, but one of them had a gun. "They shot him in the head," he said grimly. "Jesus," I said. My boss told me Carlos had been rushed to the hospital, but he was hanging by a thread, almost certain to die. Or, if he survived, he'd be a vegetable. I was shaken. Deeply, deeply shaken. Poor Carlos. His poor girlfriend. His poor, mangy dog. And a thought intruded. Was it because of the old woman? What about the family that used to come in Sundays but had disappeared? Had misfortune struck them too? I resolved that the next time I saw the old woman, I would ask her what she was doing. I wouldn't let her pay for the next customer. The old woman returned just this afternoon. There were only a handful of customers, as it was between the lunch and dinner hour. As always, I didn't hear her come in. One moment I was busy bussing dishes. The next I spotted her at the booth. I straightened up and approached her. Her sunken eyes turned to me. I could never get over the feeling I was looking at death itself. Then she gave that sudden inhalation like she was remembering to breathe, and she said, "Coffee, black." And I was surprised at the end.
"A root beer float," she added. I just pressed my lips together, nodded, and went to get the drinks. Surveyed the room. There were 3 other tables with customers. An old couple, a family with a teenage daughter, a woman working on her laptop. And even though I should have gotten the old woman her drinks right away, I instead made sure to get everyone else's orders to their tables and to get their bills to them. The couple paid, as did the woman on her laptop. That left only the family. They were still eating. I fetched the coffee and the float for the old woman, but mentally resolved not to let her pay for anybody. She did not react to my placing the drinks beside her. I was tense, counting the minutes until the family was near to finishing. The old woman cleared her throat. Ignoring her, I hurried over to the family and asked if they wanted dessert. They didn't, so I asked how they'd like to pay and quickly rang them up. Only then did I return to the old woman's booth. She had not touched either drink. She put a $10 bill on the table and said, "The root beer float is for you." "Oh," I said, and goosebumps rose along my arms, because how did she know that root beer floats are my favorite? "No, I can't have customers buy me drinks. It's against policy." "I insist," she said. "I'll bring you change for the coffee." She got up. "Actually, wait, here. I'll pay for everything." I quickly reached into my pocket for my wallet and dropped $10 onto the table. "I'll get your coffee too, on the house, since I took so long with your order." She frowned. "Accept the gift that is given to you." "Nope. I can pay for the root beer float, even though I didn't drink it, and your coffee is free." And I took her $10 and, holding my breath, seized her papery hand and shoved the bill into her fingers. She exhaled and left. I didn't turn around as she walked past me.
didn't hear the doorbell ring, but a moment later, when I looked over my shoulder, there was no trace of the old woman. A feeling of relief swept over me.
A little while later, the dinner hour had arrived and the tables were full. I heard the doorbell ring and it was them, my family of regulars. Today's not a Sunday and I hadn't seen them in so long, so I was very surprised. I cleaned up their usual booth and got them seated. And when I came over to take their order, I exclaimed about how I'd missed seeing them. "Oh yeah, it was pretty crazy," said the dad. "After we left, last time we drove together, and I don't know if you remember how hard it was raining, but the car skidded and we lost control." "You lost control," corrected the mom. "Yes, I lost control because it was the minivan that I told you not to get because those things flip way too easily. And it did. It rolled. I mean, it spun out right in the middle of the highway and then flipped over the guardrail and rolled." "I swear my soul left my body," said one of the kids. "It was very harrowing. We just couldn't come back here for a while because of the accident, but the kids kept asking, so tonight they decided to meet here for dinner." After I put in their order, I called my boss to let him know because he'd been worried about them too. He sounded delighted on the phone and told me he had some good news of his own. "Carlos is going to pull through. He's awake from the coma, and he's now on the road to recovery." "That's great," I said, even as at that moment something clicked. I typed all this up instead of leaving at the end of my shift tonight. I've been thinking about the old woman, how she looked, well, like death, or maybe more like near death. I keep thinking about how Carlos took a bullet to the brain, how the family of regulars were in a horrific accident, how all of them should have been dead, but they survived by a miracle. And I think I may have made a terrible mistake. So now I'm terrified to leave the diner. Terrified because I didn't let her pay for my drink. I just don't want to know what happens.
Tiny, muffled steps hurried down the hall to our bedroom. They stopped just outside our door as a small hand slowly pushed open the old moaning door. There were more footsteps, then a small hop up onto the foot of the bed, and a clumsy crawl up to right between my wife and I. My daughter, 4, often awakened in the middle of the night to come seeking the safety only a parent's bed can provide. Having recently moved in, my wife and I had been lenient on allowing her to come and sleep with us. New houses come with new sounds to get used to, new shadows to puzzle out in the dark. And though this house was new to us, it was actually quite old. There was no shortage of creaks and groans pervading the 100-year-old floorboards and walls. We understood the transition would take some time and she may feel uncomfortable for a while, but it wasn't a habit we wanted to encourage forever. Eventually, we would resume the ritual of returning her to her bed at whatever ungodly hour she had come in. Not tonight, though. Exhausted from a long day of wrangling in our new yard that the old owner had let go feral, I laid facing the wall with my back to my daughter, implementing my recent strategy of ignoring her until she was dead asleep. Given the slightest bit of attention, even in the middle of the night, my daughter would have trouble finding sleep again. But fortunately, she settled in under the comforter and was quiet. I closed my eyes, hoping I could also go back to sleep quickly. About half a minute passed, then tap, tap, tap. Cold, tiny fingers poked my shoulder. I groaned, eyes still closed. Couldn't give her too much. She brought her arm back down quickly, but didn't say anything. My wife stirred on the other side of the bed. I tried to fall asleep again. I was just dozing off when I heard a thin and raspy voice mutter, "Daddy?" "Huh?" I grunted, coming to in a start, but still half asleep. Her voice sounded a bit off, the way some sounds do when you are teetering on the edge of a dream, not sure which side of sleep it came from. I lay still, continuing my strategy. She said nothing else, and I was finally able to fall back to sleep. It was still dark outside when she kicked me with her little foot right in the back. I jolted awake and nudged her legs away, straightening her out. I reached over and tapped my phone on the bedside table to check the time. Through blurry eyes, I could see it was still a couple hours until morning. Deciding that I needed to get some good rest before another long day of yard work, I stood, then reached down and scooped up my daughter to take her back to her room. I managed to find my way down the hall to her room in the dark, trying to keep my eyes mostly closed as to not wake up too much. Nudging open her moaning door with my shoulder, I saw moonlight shining through the bedroom window, illuminating my daughter's bed. Laying there, snuggled up under her covers with her doll, was my little girl, fast asleep. I froze, confused with what I was seeing.
I blinked hard to clear away the haze of sleep. I slowly dipped my head to see who I was holding, and as the blurriness cleared, I saw another small girl, about my daughter's age, staring up at me with yellow eyes from sunken sockets. Cool moonlight illuminated horrible gray skin and thin tendrils of black hair. She looked frozen at first, then her lips parted slowly in a grin, revealing dirty brownish teeth. She wore a filthy nightgown with ruffles around the collar, and I became vividly aware of the scrawny, bony body beneath it. The dead girl giggled with her raspy voice, and I dropped her, letting out a shriek of terror. She hit the floorboards with a thud, then hopped to her feet and scurried out the door into the darkness, giggling as she went. I listened to her tiny footsteps fade away down the hall. "Daddy?" I inhaled sharply as I turned to look over at my daughter's bed, realizing I hadn't been breathing. She was propped up on one arm, wiping the sleep out of her eyes with the other hand. "Hey," I said, barely able to squeak it out. I stepped over and scooped her up, then walked over to her doorway. I stood there for a moment listening, building the courage to step out into the hall. My room was only about 10 steps away, but it felt like a mile. Finally, fairly certain the hall was empty, I took the first step. The second one came easier, and soon I was in an all-out sprint, sure the dead girl was right behind me. I made it to our bed and placed my daughter down in the middle, next to my wife, where she fell fast asleep. I lay still next to her until the sun came up, wide awake, eyes fixed on the dark hallway, listening for footsteps. Years ago, he confined something to a trunk. He did not do so with courage or conviction, but with that frantic, graceless recoil of someone who cannot bear to look too long at a mistake steeped in shame. He fastened it with padlocks, as if iron could restrain what slips beyond language itself, and dragged it to the most remote corner he could find. He wishes he could say he forgot it, but forgetting is a privilege reserved for the unblemished. Sometimes the trunk would tremble. It released faint sounds, like the murmurs of a creature unfamiliar with life, yet stubbornly unwilling to surrender to death. From a distance, he heard it, its agitation echoing his own. He approached, compelled by the perverse curiosity of a condemned man who leans over the void, even as the void leans back. But he never opened it. Not then.
A few years ago, he yielded to an impulse he still cannot decipher. He lifted the lid the slightest amount, and what he saw inside repudiated him outright. It unmade him. It was the living denial of the lies he recited to himself each day. It was dying, yes, but with that solemn, deliberate slowness known only to things that once mattered too deeply, as though its protracted agony sought to remind the world of the gravity of what had been lost. Its suffering immobilized him, reducing him to a futile spectator of his own unraveling. He slammed the lid shut as if the violence of that gesture could crush the terror within. He added more locks, more bars, more layers of self-deceit, and he hid it in a place he prayed he would never stumble upon again. Time passed, and the trunk emitted no sound, no movement, only a grave, immaculate stillness. Yet that stillness was its cruelest method of lingering. It did not pursue him, it regarded him. It allowed him to advance, to study, to feign stability, all the while knowing that any semblance of that stability
Obroth was a structure raised atop a corpse. Whenever a memory threatened to stir it, he inverted it, turning it into denial, contradiction, refusal. It is easy to flee when one believes that what one flees is already dead. There were those who urged him to open it. They spoke with the serene confidence of people who have never held an abyss in their hands. He ascribed to them malice, naivete, or a cruelty disguised as benevolence. Yet the voices multiplied. They were not driven by resentment, nor by a desire to witness his collapse. They simply did not understand. Or perhaps they understood with intolerable clarity. He approached the trunk again. This time it did not stir. He thought, if it no longer lives, what harm could there be in opening it a little further? What threat can emerge from something devoid of breath? The voices persisted. There is no evil inside. It was tempting to believe them. Evil, after all, rarely resides where it is most conveniently expected. He opened the trunk. What lay inside had long been dead, yet its corpse exhaled a revulsion that emanated not from its decay, but from the rot within himself. It was as though its decomposition pointed silently to all the corruption he had cultivated outside. At times, buoyed by those external assurances, he could endure its presence for a fleeting moment, like someone acclimating to the stale odor of a sealed room. But a single unguarded blink was enough for vertigo to seize him. His stomach knotted, his vision darkened, his body recoiled, and any peace, if it had ever existed, drained from him like cold, deliberate blood. He understood then that what lay in the trunk was the incontrovertible proof of the decay of something that had once defined him, an incomplete being, unable to die because it had never been permitted to be born. Its condition was not accidental, but carefully, cruelly engineered. Its disintegration spoke of what might have been, a life lived without guilt's oppressive weight, without fear's constant surveillance. A life mundane, perhaps, or at least one less conscious of its own fragility. But nothing remained intact now, and the mind, stubborn in its compulsive need to comprehend, only deepened the wound. What is one to do when one looks inward and finds that the part meant to be saved perished long ago? Leave beside the corpse in the trunk, allowing it to consume what remains of identity. Shut the trunk again, condemning it to a silence that offers no salvation. Expose it, knowing no one truly wishes to bear a horror that is not their own. What answer is there? He does not know. and he fears that the absence of an answer is, in itself, the final verdict. Every bizarre thing has its own terrible ending. Every crime has its own punishment, even though they may not be listed in our mortal law book. I should know this. I should be aware that
everything today is just the result of the past, that the future is born from the present. I should have perceived this. As I type these words, the goddess of death is with me. She has always been here. What comes next is my judgment, not from police or courts, but in the name of revenge, justice, and a moral law that operates above our own. There is no time for regret. I should have thought of all this before my wife of 15 years vanished, her remains still unknown. Please, Celine, please just let me finish this. This record isn't for anyone else. It is my last, worthless remorse. It began with the strange disappearance of my wife, Claire. She went for a walk with our dog, Fortune, and never returned. An hour passed. 3. A whole night. I told myself she was lost, but her car keys were still in the garage. Everyone knows the coyotes don't come within 50 kilometers of our peaceful town. I thought it was a kidnapping. I called the police. They searched for 3 days and found nothing. The town helped, but we found no trace, not of my unfortunate, warm-hearted wife, nor of the dog. My heart wasn't just broken, it was shattered. In that instant, I lost the will to live. I should have put a gun to my head then. It would have been a mercy. But fate is a playful, joyful thing. Instead, I visited my old school, the place I'd met my wife. I was standing before the old gate I hadn't seen in 25 years, thinking of Claire, the woman who was supposed to be with me for life, when I heard footsteps behind me. The guard? A teacher? I turned. It was a woman. She wore a white dress and cheap second-hand slippers. Before I could speak, her voice stopped me, soft and seductive, like a demon's whisper. Her name was Celine. She was beautiful, descended from the moon. She said she was from Greece, and my weary mind thought of the Odyssey and heroic lore. Was I, a pathetic middle-aged man wrecked by life's tsunami, being saved? Would I spend the rest of my life in paradise with a goddess? "Nice to meet you," she said. "You seem like a really nice guy. Can I have your phone number?" I hesitated, sure this was a scam. My instincts screamed to stop, but I lost to my desire. I gave her my number. In return, she gave me a kiss I would never forget, a gift after my loss. She looked so innocent, so perfect. Why did I deserve her? I argued with myself, but I kept losing to that desire. A few days later, we met at a bar. A weird sense of familiarity washed over me. I hadn't been in a bar in 20 years. My wife was religious and hated alcohol. The feeling vanished as soon as our date began. She was so nice, talkative, passionate, and compassionate. That was the most precious thing. She understood me perfectly, even before I spoke, better than my wife ever had. Her words were an unforgettable melody. On that first date, I felt a crash stronger than any I'd ever known. We set another date for the following week. I felt saved. 1 month to the day after that first meeting, we were married. She knew everything about me, often voicing thoughts I hadn't spoken. I felt a moment of alarm, but it was disarmed by her innocent look and her heartbreaking history. She told me, through tears, how an older boyfriend had impregnated and abandoned her. Kicked out at 18, she was homeless for a time with her baby, who later died of an untreated disease because her identification was left behind at her parents' house. She spoke of suicide, of working 12-hour days and 3 jobs to survive. She said she came here to start a new life, to help her make some good deeds and forget all that pain. She told me I was like an angel, and that her boyfriend was a monster. I should have been scared, but I wasn't. I always felt I loved her even more when she told me about her bad life.
Ben Nibes are men, working 10-hour days and going to night school, finishing 4 years of school in 2, and finally being accepted to university. Her story moved me. I told her my pain about Claire. We were the perfect pair, offering each other redemption from the deepest valley of life. She was flawless, her personality and appearance like polished marble. A miracle, a God sent to help me. I thought I could use a year to mourn Claire and move on. But this goddess made me forget the woman who truly loved me. It was the last mistake I would ever make, the mistake that pushed me into hell. Or perhaps my fate was sealed long before I ever met Claire. As I write this, my stomach is in agony, a pain that makes every second feel like 10,000 years. It feels like someone is warping my intestines like a rope. I can't call the police. She is beside me, watching me type. There is no escape. The answer is in her smiling face, a smile that reveals her cruel nature. Death is here. I have vomited 10 times this hour. My head is swelling. I only have minutes left. Why? I whispered, blood spraying from my lips. I've given you everything. What do you want? You'll get my fortune when I pass. I don't care about the jewelry or the spending. Why? After I asked for the 3rd time, she spoke. You should look at yourself, Playboy. You have a debt to pay, far more than you think you owe me. Impossible. That's absurd. I was shocked. I'll give you anything. Another $10,000? Please, just tell me what you want. My words were unorganized, broken. She said in a cold voice, if you can use that prideful brain, just think. Do you remember 20 years ago, that bar on Young Street? A girl, trying to look older than she was, sat in a corner that no one noticed, hoping nobody would ask for the ID she couldn't show. She was quiet, trying not to be seen. Then, a man approached, a polite gentleman in a white suit and glasses. He bought her the most expensive wine and told her, "You're more mature than you look." He offered her a ride, drove her to a motel, and later, when she was nervous, he visited her, gave her a hug, and a wad of cash. He told her she didn't need to worry about the future. She only needed to learn how to be a good mother. A month later, she was pregnant, but the gentleman had vanished. He took her trust, her youth, her future. All he left her was a child she couldn't afford. She was kicked out of school, then her home. For 20 years, she grew in the abyss, abandoned by everyone. And that man, the son of Satan who started this tragedy, is sitting right here, still pretending to be innocent. I was so shocked I stopped writing for 2 minutes. My brain used all its strength to do one thing: think. As she ordered, think. It was all true. That's why the bar felt familiar. That's why I never went back. That's why she knew everything about me. That's why my pitiful wife, Claire, was gone. She would never be found. That was just the beginning. I should have noticed. I should have. My limbs are so heavy, as if pulled by 6 times the gravity. I vomited again,
More blood and digested remains. My head grew heavier. I tried to scream, but my muscles, my brain, betrayed me.
Please, please, I beg you. I have a daughter. She's only 8 years old. She keeps asking me when money is coming home. I beg you, I'll do anything for Mercy. I didn't mean to abandon you. I thought we were just drunk. I thought I had no strength left. I knew the ending. This long game, she had won at last. For 20 years, she suffered immeasurable sorrow, was shattered countless times, lost her child to poverty and abandonment. She lost everything. She hated everything, but that hatred became her hope to survive. 20 years of revenge, ending today, on the anniversary of the night it all began. Before the end, I begged one last time. Please, I can do nothing, I know, but I just want to hug you once more, like that night 20 years ago, like that. This is my last strength. The sky is beautiful today, just like that night, but my vision is turning dark. Wait, wait, why are you turning off the light?